Hi, this is Alexander Scott, a member of LANS presenting this edition of our weekly updates. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to visit our website at jalans.org or follow us on social media. Our Twitter handle is @lans_ja. Now we'll begin with housing. In a recent article in the Jamaica Gleaner titled Bamboo Houses Inch Closer to Reality with NHG Funds, it was disclosed that the Bureau of Standards Jamaica and the Bamboo Industry Association are set to engage in further research and development of bamboo houses in Jamaica. It was noted that the hope is that the bamboo material which is to be used in the building, in the construction, will greatly decrease our need for both lumber and plywood, which we import at a costly expense because it requires foreign exchange at the moment. Now, it was also pointed out in this article that in the prototype model, which was built in 2014, and this is a prototype model which may very well be used for future units. It contains steel and cement block, and it contains steel and cement block in order to withstand both our hurricanes and the earthquakes. I say earthquakes because, as I'm sure we know, or we should know, Jamaica lies in an earthquake zone. Now, alternative materials, local materials, renewable materials, and cheaper materials for the construction industry and the housing sector in particular is more than welcome. It's a more than welcome move, and the thinking outside the box to find solutions to these burning issues which are affecting us all is something which we at LANS can really get behind. Now, this initiative, if successful, we think could help us as a nation as we seek to ensure that every citizen has a right to an affordable and decent house, that right is met, and that right can be met by providing a cheaper form of alternative material to building houses, as well as an alternative model of housing, which we are seeing with these bamboo houses. Now, another aspect of this is that it helps reduce our global carbon emission footprint. Now, however small that footprint on our part is, and it is small, we think that just by doing this, we would not only be reducing that footprint, but it is also something which others who have a larger footprint can look at and see that it works and follow on upon. Now, the second article dealing with housing was in the Jamaica Observer, and it was titled Brink of Disaster. And in this article it spoke about a community in the East Kingston constituency which, after being used as a test case in 2012 to study alternative methods for managing risks and vulnerabilities that the community normally faces during storms, it has been left worse off after the project ended. Now, it must be noted, and it was mentioned in this article, that the project took place despite the residents' warnings and concerns that the works that they were doing, the alternative methods they were trying out, would result in the types of damages that they're now experiencing. So now the residents in these communities, they're living with constant flooding, landslides, and land slippages when it rains. And the thought of protracted rains brings the real fear of loss of property. Now, the article goes on to state that even with continuous outreach and interaction with their Member of Parliament, things have not gotten any better. And this is in spite of them being told by the Member of Parliament and various agencies that this is being treated as an urgent issue. Now, we think this issue highlights the need to properly consult with the citizens about any potential transformation to their environment simply because they know it best. This is something which should also be kept in mind for any future administration which is looking to or thinking about resettling citizens. Communication and understanding the people's needs is key. Now, as we continue to recover from the recent storms and as we continue discussions about moving people in informal settlements and moving persons from vulnerable settlements to safer areas and more formal settlements, we at Lands firmly believe that the people, and that is especially the people who are to be directly impacted by such measures, need to not simply be consulted, but have their issues and points taken on board and kept in mind when coming to a conclusion. Next, we move to the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's being handled within the region, with articles from the Jamaica Gleaner titled Cuba Gears Up to Start COVID-19 Vaccination, and Reuters titled Venezuela Signs Contract with Russia to Acquire Coronavirus Vaccine. In the Gleaner article, it speaks of how Cuba, in spite of decades of illegal blockade, has managed to create 2 vaccines suited to the environment found in the global south and have expressed their willingness to share these vaccines, but for the most part can't due to US aggression against nations who may accept them. Now, by suited to the environment found in the global south, what that simply means is that these 2 vaccines, they can be stored at temperatures at a higher temperature than you can normally do with the vaccines produced by, say, Pfizer or Moderna. And this suits the global south because we generally either don't have the technology to keep things at such a low temperature, or we find it difficult for a myriad of reasons to keep the said equipment going at a consistent basis. Now, the article goes on to state that both Cuban medical personnel and citizens of Jamaica are more than confident and willing to take the Cuban vaccine, and that Cuban medical personnel, both in Cuba, in Jamaica, and in the Henry Reeves Brigade abroad, will be taking the vaccine. The article also, though, points out that the Jamaican government, while it's not banning its citizens from accessing the vaccine, it will not be importing the vaccine itself. Now, the Reuters article spoke about how the Venezuelan government has signed a deal with the Russian government to ship some 10 million doses of the Russian vaccine. Now, while this article was short, it was very brief, it also noted that Venezuela did begin administering the Russian vaccine as part of a clinical trial in October, and that Argentina, ever since the vaccine has been approved, has been administering the vaccine to treat its citizens. Now, these 2 countries, Venezuela and Cuba, who are facing an onslaught from a common enemy, are proof, if we needed any, that nations of the global south are able to stand tall, to take care of themselves and to take care of others without the input of our former colonizers. Now, despite the economic embargoes which affect the importing of critical goods, both of them still have an extremely low infection rate and an even smaller death rate associated with this virus. The Russian intervention is also proof that these deals of literal life or death need not be about simple penny pinching, as we see with the United States, but instead can and should be mutually beneficial. We commend the nations of the global south, the oppressed nations, Nicaragua, Cuba, Vietnam, China, and Russia, who are not only showing us that other paths are open to tackling this virus, but for also extending the hand of friendship consistently, and especially in this time of need. Finally, we will end with our relationship with the United States. The first article comes from the Gleaner, and it is titled Battle Lines Drawn. Tapia says Jamaica should consider where it would stand in US-China war. In this interview with the ambassador, he noted that the Jamaican government has a tough decision to make as it relates to our relationship with China, while also stating that further Chinese finance and infrastructure programs could well result in the United States ending their current insistence in terms of intelligence sharing and military training. Now, the Observer's article, titled Righting a Wrong, Tapia Pushing to Get fishermen home, carried an interview with the said ambassador, as he expressed his regrets at the fact that 4 Jamaican fishermen were wrongfully arrested with their boat destroyed on suspicion of carrying drugs under the shipwrighter agreement. He then stated that the events were unfortunate, that the men will be returned home as quickly as possible, and that the reasons behind the false positives which resulted in their arrests will be investigated. Now, these two incidents happening back to back highlight, in our opinion, why Jamaica needs to break away from United States dominance, and how this one-sided relationship is open to abuse, as well as why instead of this relationship we need to engage in greater South-South cooperation. The ambassador's statements about China reveal the abuse in this relationship. For while the Chinese offer financial, technological, and infrastructural deals, the United States offer nothing of that kind, and instead insist that Jamaica must either cut all ties with China, thereby harming ourselves economically, in order to satisfy the United States' perceived conflict with China, or else our national security may very well be put at risk because the United States is threatening to withdraw assistance. The abuse of the shipwrighter agreement now has been well documented since it was first signed almost 20 years ago, and it's clear that the handing over of our rights to a foreign power has failed to either stem the flow of drugs to the United States or end the flow of guns entering this island. Here again, greater South-South interaction, that is, building links with nations in the global South, more specifically, since we're talking about this, that is, nations within CARICOM, nations within Latin America as a whole, as opposed to nations of the global north, could see us attract both foreign assistance in areas such as pharmaceuticals, as we've been talking about earlier with the Cuban and Russian vaccine, and even human construction, on terms which are more mutually beneficial to ourselves, things which we don't currently get from the United States. And it would also see us address our national security issues, as again we'd be engaging with nations with shared issues, that is, nations who are seeking to tackle this burgeoning and booming drug transshipment problem that we're all facing, and we're all seeking to find a similar outcome as it relates to this high infiltration of guns that are coming. So there again, we're seeing a greater South-South interaction, meaning interaction with nations within CARICOM and within Latin America as a whole, could again stem the flow of drugs and stem the flow of guns entering the region, therefore negating the need for the United States involvement. We don't really need American involvement here, and these two issues, I think, these two incidents, I think, are really highlighting again why we need to leave, and highlighting again how it is we can build these greater links. Finally, we will end with our relationship with the United States. The first article comes from The Gleaner, and it's titled Battle Lines Drawn. Tapia says Jamaica should consider where it would stand in US-China war. Now, in this interview with the ambassador, he noted that the Jamaican government has a tough decision to make as it relates to our relationship with China, while also stating that further Chinese finance and infrastructure programs could well result in the United States ending their current assistance in terms of intelligence sharing and military training, as well as the hardware, that is, military equipment, which they sell to us. Now, the Observer article, titled Righting a Wrong, Tapia Pushing to Get Fishermen Home, carried an interview with the said ambassador in which he expressed his regrets at the fact that 4 Jamaican fishermen were wrongfully arrested with their boat destroyed on suspicion of carrying drugs under the shipwrighter agreement. He went on to state that the event was very unfortunate and that the men will be returned home as quickly as possible. They in fact were returned home on December 31st, 2020, and that the reasons behind the false positives which resulted in their arrests will be investigated. Signing off, this is Alexander Scott. This is Land's Weekly Update.